Good morning. It is Thursday, the 5th of March. I'm Maeve McMahon and this is Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis, live here on Euronews. Coming up, US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth says the Iranian regime is, quote, toast and they know it, as the war on Iran enters a sixth day. Senior US officials are warning the conflict is far from over and could spiral into a prolonged war. The Pentagon has released a video, it says, shows US submarines sinking an Iranian warship off Sri Lanka. And Tehran now says the death toll has climbed above 1,000. Across the Gulf, drones and missiles have struck oil facilities and US embassies as Iran retaliates. And Israel has pushed troops deeper into Lebanon, targeting the Tehran-backed Hezbollah. And air raid sirens could also be heard this morning in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Erbil, and there were several explosions across Tehran. Following the story, Euronews has correspondents all across the globe. For The View, though, this morning from Qatar, we can cross first over to Doha and get the latest from our correspondent, Adel Khalim. Good morning, Adel. Look, the longer the war goes on, the worse it seems to be getting. What is the situation across the Middle East this morning?
Maeve, there's been significant developments in the last 24 hours. Just this morning, Qatar's Ministry of Interior announced that authorities are evacuating residents from the vicinity of the U.S. Embassy here in Doha, just 6 kilometers from where I'm standing. Now, this comes obviously after recent attacks on U.S. embassies and consulates across the region in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Also, the Qatar News Agency announced that Qatar's Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Al Thani, received a phone call from Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, just yesterday. And now, this is significant because this is the first time the two leaders have spoken since the start of this war. Now, during that call, Qatar's Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed, categorically rejected Iran's claims that it was not attacking Qatar and just U.S. interests alone. Sheikh Mohammed reportedly pointed to recent strike attempts at Doha's airport, as well as the two LNG production facilities, and called for an immediate halt to the attacks. So while this doesn't sound like the leaders had a lot of in agreement, they didn't see eye to eye on a lot, it's significant that they're having this conversation at all. Just 24 hours previously, Qatar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said there were no open lines of communication between the two countries. Maeve?
And Adele, what about travellers stranded in the airports there? What is the latest on that front?
That's a very complicated situation as well. Some flights are operating. The U.S. State Department says 17,500 Americans have now returned back to U.S. soil, have left the Middle East. In fact, nearly half of them, 8,500, touched down just on Tuesday alone. Now, both Qatar and the UAE have said they will cover hotel and food costs for all stranded passengers. But here in Qatar, the airspace remains closed, and there are 8,000 stranded passengers here. I spoke to one, a reality TV star, who says that he was returning home from India to touchdown in Doha and then going back to Texas when the plane was diverted and U-turned back to Doha. It was at this moment that Oliver Sims noticed something was wrong and started to feel scared. Let's hear from him himself.
I would say that this is definitely a scary situation because, being here right now, I'm very concerned still. Should I leave the country? Should I go to Saudi Arabia and fly out of there? Should I go to Oman and fly out of there? But, a lot of Qatari citizens have told me, they were like, you know what, just stay put. It's fine because Doha and Qatar are pretty safe, which I do believe as well. But it is just nice and reassuring having a local say that.
Reality TV star Oliver Sims there speaking to our correspondent Adel Khalim. Now, European governments are getting worried about the impact the Middle East crisis is having on them. Energy, gas, food prices have all spiked, and capitals are also jittery about citizens stranded in the region. For The View from Belgium, Euronews' Lauren Walker spoke exclusively to Belgium's Defence Minister Theo Franken.
Minister, thank you for joining us. Firstly, what is your reaction to this war? And in your eyes, is it legal?
It's a big discussion, of course, and I think that when you see international law and the interpretation of the last few decades, it can be problematic. But it's a righteous cause to try to decapitate the Ayatollah regime. That's something totally, it's rightful. So I think that there's a lot of discussion about it. I fully understand this. But I cannot support the Ayatollah regime, not for a second. It is the most cruel regime of the world. They're supporting Hamas, they're supporting and financing Hezbollah and Houthi and all those terrorist actors in the Middle East, but also in Europe, also here in Brussels, also in Belgium. So I think that this may be problematic concerning international law, but I think that it can be defended as well. That they try to take out all those dictators and mullahs and ayatollahs.
So you think the means justify the end here?
For me, I think it is, yeah. I think that also the same thing has been said by our Minister of Foreign Affairs yesterday in the Parliament. So yes, we're totally on the same line.
And yesterday you said that Belgium is preparing to provide military support should this be requested in the region. What could this support look like? And if Belgium does provide support, does this mean Belgium is at war as well?
No, so it will be defensive actions. So, for example, a country like Jordan asking for aid, then we can help them to protect their territory. It's not to start a war or to continue or to participate with Israel and the United States. It's more to help people and countries in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, as we've just said, Belgium is providing support. Do you think the EU as a whole should also be doing more to support allies in the region?
Yeah, of course, but like military decisions, it is the sovereignty of every and each country, so that's not easy. I think that Europe needs to really be very clear on the support for Cyprus, but on the Middle East, it's more like bilateral.
And lastly, Belgium recently seized a suspected Russian Shadow Fleet tanker. What will happen with this tanker now? And does this signify a ramping up of the targeting of Moscow's fleet of vessels?
Yes, we need to really increase pressure on the Putin regime to really get peace negotiations who are true and who are well meant. We don't have that for the moment. And I think that the only way we can increase pressure is to work on their income, to work on their oil and gas revenues. And that means that we need to also tackle on the logistic lines. And that means that we need to tackle the shadow fleet. So, yes, we will continue on that pathway.
And do you think that now this conflict in the Middle East, that it threatens taking the attention away from what is happening in Russia and Ukraine, which was obviously, until about 2-3 weeks ago, the main topic on the EU agenda?
No, I think that the east part of our continent keeps on being number one priority.
Thank you, Minister.
Euronews' Lauren Walker there speaking to the Belgian Minister for Defence, Theo Franken. And now the Spanish government has doubled down on President Donald Trump's threat to cut trade off with Spain. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez insists his country will not be complicit in the conflict in the Middle East, saying it was like playing, quote, Russian roulette with the destiny of millions. Our Jakob Yanis takes a closer look at this diplomatic dispute.
It all started with a geopolitical earthquake. Following the US and Israeli strikes on Iran, Israel's foreign minister called out Europe's deep divisions.
The Spanish government, which is standing with all the tyrants of the world like it stood with Venezuela, they are standing now with Iran.
And Madrid fired back. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez declared a firm no to war and blocked the US from using Spanish soil for its Iran operations. And in response, Donald Trump threatened to cut off all trade with Spain. So let's break down what is at stake. First, the military footprint. Spain vetoed US access to its Rota and Moron military bases. And these two strategically vital hubs for Washington in Europe sit near the Strait of Gibraltar, acting as a primary gateway for projecting American power into the Middle East. And without them, US logistics gets significantly more complicated. And second, there is the economic fallout. Because as one of Spain's largest non-EU trading partners, the US accounts for tens of billions of euros in annual trade. And if Washington pulls the plug, it could devastate Spanish exporters, hitting everything from heavy machinery and pharmaceuticals to wine and olive oil. However, Madrid insists it is standing on the side of international law and pointing to the Iraq war that took place around 20 years ago. Sanchez warned against repeating the same mistakes of the past. And he argued that Spain, backing US military action back then, only unleashed massive insecurity across Europe. But with Washington using trade as a weapon against yet another NATO ally, only one question remains. Who will blink first this time?
And to hear how Spaniards feel about the stance of their Prime Minister, Euronews Madrid correspondents David Artiles and Isidro Montero took to the streets of the Spanish capital to ask them.
I think military bases can't be used to whatever Trump feels like. So Sanchez took that decision. It's true that we hope it doesn't have consequences because it is how Trump operates, but I think the decision Sanchez has made is very good.
Sí, pero bueno, a mí me parece muy bien la decisión que ha tomado. Trump es una ilegalidad desde su...
Trump is illegal in his actions and in his very being. What he does is illegal. He is a pseudo-dictator, an undesirable character for me.
No es un personaje no deseable para mí.
Claro, porque Sánchez... Of course, Sanchez's response has been that he doesn't want war, and that's normal. We don't want war. We want them to stop now.
Sanchez has done the right thing, because the more they avoid this, the better.
And for more on this, we're joined here on set by Euronews' EU editor, Maria Tadeo, who covered Spanish politics for years. Maria, what does this fight mean now for the US government? Who's going to blink first?
Well, Pedro Sanchez is certainly not going to blink at this point because, yes, this is a story with many ramifications. The politics, but also the security aspect of it. Both, of course, are NATO countries. There's the intelligence sharing, and then, of course, the business ties between Spain and the US. But at this stage, and yesterday I reported extensively on Euronews about this. I was on the phone really trying to get a sense of the thinking of the Spanish president and the Spanish prime minister at this stage. And the idea is that he has a strategy that is twofold. One, he believes and detects that a big part of the Spanish population is against this war and does not want a war. He also detects that President Trump is someone who's incredibly polarizing for Spanish voters. So he needs to activate his own base back in Spain. And that means progressive voters. It means, of course, militant voters. It means, of course, left-leaning voters. So he wants to really mobilize his core. Of course, there's an election in Spain in 2027. And then the other part of this is that they really want to replicate this sort of Dominique de Villepin moment. Of course, if we go back to 2003, remember, that was a U.S. intervention in Iran, or Iraq, I should note. At the time, Dominique de Villepin said that the war would lead to disastrous consequences. The Spanish prime minister is essentially replicating now that speech, believing that it can also propel his international image. And just finally, the Spanish government is preparing to put together, according to sources that spoke to Euronews, a big gathering of progressive voices in Barcelona in April. That was confirmed yesterday by the Brazilian president, who says he will attend.
And we can read more about that, of course, on Euronews.com. But Maria, just on another register, yesterday you were in Luxembourg at the European Investment Bank talks, and you had the opportunity to speak to an actor that we all know and love.
Indeed. So Nikolai Coster-Waldau, of course, he's part of this group of Scandinavian actors that have really managed to be successful in Hollywood. Of course, we all remember him as Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones, but he also is an ambassador for the United Nations, the development program of the UN too. And I was struck really, by how willingly open he is to talk about politics, but two, how much he defended the UN, obviously in the context of a very contentious board of peace led by President Trump. Let's take a look. Nikolai Coster-Waldau, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, you've had a very successful television and film career. You don't need an introduction, but there's another side of you, which is the many years that you've dedicated to humanitarian causes and also climate. And the obvious question, certainly to me, is why?
Well, because I think it's important, because it's something that's always I've had an interest in this. I think it affects all of us. And that's why when I was asked by the UNDP if I wanted to be a goodwill ambassador in 2016, I instantly said yes, because I believe in the UN. I believe in the international, coming together. But the thing is, I wasn't quite sure about the DP. And the United Nations Development Program is the biggest aid agency in the world, and I didn't know enough about them, so I had to also educate myself.
I'm happy you said yes immediately. You've been doing this work for now almost 10 years.
Yes.
But you said, I believe in the work that the UN does.
Yes.
Why? And there's a political reality behind this. I don't want to get too quick into the politics, but for a year now, the Trump administration has been very vocal saying we consider that this is basically now woke club. The Secretary General is not.
I don't understand how you can call it a woke club. It was built on the ruins of the Second World War, and it's the whole idea behind when you look at the Charter of the UN. It's about let's come together. Let's not fight. Let's talk it out. Let's use diplomacy. And of course, is the UN perfect? No. Does it need reform? Absolutely. Is it a good idea to have a Security Council with 5 members that are just stuck there and can always veto? No, it's a terrible idea. But the alternative, where we just go out and all try to fight for ourselves, we've done that before the UN. It's not a good idea, and I think we have to insist on communication.
So you feel very strongly about this. That's what I'm picking up from you. You're going deeply into.
You don't believe in the UN?
But the question may be...
No. I can ask you a question, because but just before we start, you asked me something which I thought was really interesting. I think that could be, because you said at the Berlinale there was artists being asked these questions, and some of them struggled to answer, and you were like,
very hard.
How can they not answer this? But you do this for a living, and you don't want to answer this. You don't believe in the UN?
In a way, I have to stay impartial, but I can't say there is a big debate about the UN. There's a board of peace now that has come up. It seems the world is split as to what is the functionality. But in your experience,
do you think there's a that he's been what do you call that thing when people make fun on the internet when they're trolling? Do you think the choice of words to call it the board of peace? Do you think that's trolling? If just hear it out loud, board of peace. We're done with peace. We just want to get rich quick. Is that it?
So is a world now where you look at it is about money now?
Well, I guess if you're cynical, you say it's always been about money somehow, right? The power grab. But that's also why we say let's get together. We have to find a way where it's not just the strongest and the biggest that control the world, where we actually all have a seat at the table, and that's why the UN is important.
And in your experience, would you go, it's been a force for good in specific cases that you've seen yourself, that you can go back and say, I saw a difference specifically with my own eyes in multiple occasions?
Yes, of course. If you look at the recent history, like the Paris Agreement, the whole world coming together to say, listen, we have to deal with climate change, we have to do something about this. Now, yes, the US have left and have rejoined, and then they left again. But the whole world is moving in this direction and standing up, and I think that is very positive.
2019, there was a big green wave. It sort of has disappeared. Nobody talks about a green planet. It's
Why
a green
do you think
industry.
that is? I can ask you that without you being...
There's been huge social pushback, of course,
yes.
Connected to what people perceive as a sort of a very expensive energy. The world has changed because of the war in Ukraine.
But I just think if you speak to young people today, I think a lot of young people are very concerned about, but for some reason it stopped being discussed in news outlets, more or less.
The media also lost interest.
Well, I think there's a lot of financial incentives involved with this. I think when the U.S. go out as aggressive as they had and say, listen, you cannot use the word climate change anymore in any official documents in the U.S. If you have these SDGs in your companies, we will not do business with you. Yeah, that is going to have huge effects on also the media companies, and we've seen that in the U.S., but also in Europe.
And then now is a final question, of course. You travel the world. When you look at Europe, how do you see Europe evolving? I know it's a very difficult question, but I've got to ask you.
Listen, it's funny, this thing, because we're talking about I think that discussion is very important. I think that it's a beautiful thing. Europe is so many countries. It's not like we can't just go like they do in the U.S. where one guy says, well, this is how we're going to do it. Now we're going to do this. No, we have to talk it out. We have to discuss. Then we find a way. But I think that is a quality. That is the insisting on democracy, insisting on discussion. And I think that if you look at the numbers of people living in the EU, in Europe, if you look at the economics, we are incredibly powerful.
Well, that brings this edition of Europe Today to an end. Tune in again tomorrow. We'll have a very special focus on Women's Day with the EU Commissioner for Women's Rights, Hajj Labib, right here in the studio. Take care and see you soon on Euronews.
Euronews is your media of record in Europe, a European newsroom at the heart of the continent's concerns. Independent knowledge available on TV, online and on your mobile app. With a unique pan-European perspective for a better understanding of today's and tomorrow's